This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Kate Williams. Kate is the CEO of 1% for the Planet, the global nonprofit that has turned a simple idea into a worldwide force for good. Businesses committing 1% of their annual revenue to environmental causes. If you've ever spotted that little 1% for the Planet logo on a favorite brand, you've seen Kate's work in action. Under her leadership, the organization has grown to more than 4,400 members across more than 110 countries, certifying nearly $1 billion in giving to date. Kate's path to this work is anything but conventional, though looking back, it all makes perfect sense. A NOLS course at age 18 opened up new horizons for Kate and gave her a crash course in leadership, responsibility, and the joys of working hard alongside passionate people with a shared purpose. That experience on NOLS led her into outdoor education, then to a leadership role at the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, and eventually to 1% for the Planet. Along the way, she stayed grounded in service and humility, and she has a knack for seeing challenges as opportunities to grow. In this conversation, Kate and I dig into her personal journey and the philosophy that drives her leadership. We talk about the growth of 1% for the Planet, the credibility it brings to a crowded sustainability space, and why she believes real leadership is built in small, consistent, humble moments. We also get into her outdoor roots, her parents' influence, the importance of curiosity, and her belief that no matter where you are in life, the journey continues. It's a wide-ranging, generous conversation with someone who's helping to reshape how businesses and individuals show up for the planet. Hope you enjoy. All right, Kate, thank you for taking time out of your super busy schedule doing such important work to chat with me. You and I chatted on the phone a few weeks ago, and I was thinking maybe we could start the conversation with our shared love and appreciation and gratitude to NOLS, National Outdoor Leadership School, because you and I share a common theme in our life in that we went on NOLS courses and it kind of helped to shape the trajectory of our lives going forward. So I was wondering if you could start out by kind of thinking back to when you were 18 years old, just before you went on NOLS, and kind of who that person was and what you were thinking about things, and then how that kind of led into your NOLS course that was so formative for you.
I went on NOLS 5 days after I graduated from high school, and I had gone to the same school my entire life. So I was a lifer, and I'd even stayed back in kindergarten. So I was like a lifer plus one extra year. So I had been in familiar context, familiar community for my life. And that was great, but it was also like a familiar context and familiar community. And I love that. But I would say who I was in those like days before going on my NOLS trip was someone who was really, really ready to be able to like be who I had become, not just who everyone had known who I was for my whole life. Because I think it can be really hard when you're in the same community. It's wonderful to be known, but it's also hard to get to change. And I think I was hungry for that. I think I was also really scared because I didn't have a whole lot of practice. I had done like summer things before. This definitely felt like a step change. Everything from, flying out to Lander on my own, felt like a big deal to not really fully knowing what to expect when I got out there. So I think I was a big bundle of nervous excitement, but I think like core, like I felt ready, even though I didn't know what I was ready for.
And how did you initially hear about NOLS?
My brother had gone on a NOLS course, and okay. I don't know sort of how it came to our family. We had a, kind of outdoorsy childhood, but in a much more kind of backyard car camp, canvas tent kind of way, which was awesome. I loved it. And, I felt like I was, dirty a lot of my childhood in like the right ways. Yeah. And I appreciate my parents for that, but, I was not backpacking in big mountains, nor was that something that my parents had comfort with. So I don't know. I think they understood those kind of challenges are valuable, but not the nature of this particular one per se.
And so you went on NOLS, you showed up in Lander for 30-day course. Can you kind of talk about that experience, both just the normal parts of it, but then kind of the big excitement that really ended up shaping you as a leader?
When I arrived in Lander, and it was, this was 1985. And so we were in the old lumberyard, which very much still kind of felt like a bay in a lumberyard. And I remember, just kind of having that like exhaustion of a new place and not knowing anyone, and then being handed this 75-pound pack. I think that's what my pack weighed. And I, at the time, weighed about 100 pounds, wet. So, and I was, an athlete, so I was strong and all that, but I was like, oh, okay. Like, this is where like, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I'm like, all right, I guess this is just what I carry.
Yeah.
And, I remember having a lot of like the early days were basically anxiety about, if we're walking down the trail and everyone wants to stop and take a break, I have to stop somewhere where I can get back up again with my pack, So I was always like looking for that rock that was like seat level so I could sit down, just like that was what I remember the first few days being about. And then as I kind of developed my comfort level with that and just got my kind of sea legs or mountain legs under me, I remember the smells, like the dry air, the cold water, the kind of ethic of, following each other's footsteps up this thing, not only for like safety and like, advantage of packing the snow, but also so as not to create a huge scar on the hillside. Or like, I remember we summited this one peak and we had divided into small groups, and my group was first. And so we got up there first, and I remembered being so excited about the like experience of coming up on the summit. And it felt like we were, of course, other people had been there before, but like we were the first ones there. And so we all decided to like go back down a ways before the next group came so they could have that experience. And I just like loved all of those like little ways of really leaning into having a wilderness experience. And then, I think as we got into the heart of it, it just, I started to realize, even though for me, I didn't have anything to compare this to, I started to become aware of like, oh, like a lot of things are way harder than they would normally be. Like we got a lot of snow, and this was in June into July. And it's like not uncommon to have snow in the mountains, but we had a lot of snow, so we had challenges like that, which as an 18-year-old who wasn't at that point feeling anything other than I just need to keep up and I just need to like, keep being here for every day. I wasn't feeling the responsibility of managing that. I was just like, show me the snow pile that I need to like plow through and I'll do it.
Yeah.
But then it was like the kind of pivot point, which really has been a touchstone for my life, is one of our instructors was scouting a climb. We were going to do our rock climbing section of a few days. And he was at the top of the cliff band. It wasn't super big, but, still something we were going to climb up. It wasn't just a little thing. And he was testing a rock and it shifted and fell. And he then proceeded to fall down and broke his leg in that fall. And we were probably 35 miles from the nearest trailhead. This is pre-sat phones, pre-cell phones. Like it was like a mechanical evacuation at that point, human mechanical evacuation. And, it was such an interesting, incredibly learning-filled experience for me. Like, spoiler alert, he got out and was fine, but the process of getting there was about 48 hours that I really do think changed my life because, we truly had to divide up and tap into all the skills that we had. So we had a couple of really just like strong, fast hiker / runners. And so one of our instructors took two of those guys and they did maybe this was like the advent of light and fast hiking, because they took, some food and then they just like hit the trail and ran for the nearest trailhead to call in a helicopter. And then another instructor took the group that was carrying the instructor with his broken leg, which as I'm sure a lot of people listening know, or if you don't know, like try to haul a adult body around. It's like really hard to do.
I mean, even hauling my, 5-year-old daughter when she was still, that was hard. I can't imagine a 170, 180 pound man.
Exactly. Who you're trying to be careful not to jostle his leg. And so I remember there was a lot of different iterations. There was like a frame pack with legs cut out so that he could sit like a little baby in the back. And that was like okay for a little while, but not great. And then essentially it was like a backpack frame litter that was made. And so there was a group of like our kind of strong oxes plodding along and carrying that. And that when we were, as all of that was getting sorted out, the lead instructor who's going to be taking that runner group out looked at me and said, okay, Kate, I want you to lead the rest of the group and all of our gear up to the top of Haley Pass and stamp out a helicopter pad. And that was like the moment when I shifted from like, I just have to like get through each day and do what everyone tells me to do, to like, oh my gosh, actually I have some responsibility here. And had that initial reaction of me, like, I don't know what to do. But I also knew like, for whatever reason, he thinks I can do this, and this is not a time to not deliver. And so that was, I think, my like leadership pivot moment, because I do look back at that moment and this, the next 24 hours as this really amazing experience. Actually, I was like kind of terrified inside, but I also realized like, okay, we have to do this. And I really loved this group. That was another piece of the experience, was we got along really well. We laughed a lot and had just a really good camaraderie, which I know is not always the case on courses. It often is, but we definitely had that, which was such a gift. But I just remember with no like Harvard Business Review knowledge or anything, I was like, well, I need to like tap into my resources because I don't know what to do. So I just remember we divided it out. Like, you're a great cook, can you cook food for us while the rest of us sort gear? Like, you're really strong, can you carry a little bit more? You're good map reading, can you like navigate, like figure out our route so that when we get up early tomorrow morning we know what we're doing? And we just kind of naturally moved into that, and I felt like comfortable and supported, and really more of a sort of peer with a voice than boss. And we did it, and we had an awesome time. I like had like some personal like rookie mistakes. I left my boots outside of the fly and it snowed overnight, and so I had like freezing wet boots the whole next day. But
I've done that before. I did it once.
Yeah, exactly. You do that once. Yeah, and then we got to the top. We stamped out the helicopter pad. Helicopter came in. Like, instructor safely got out, and I remember standing on that pass, looking out, and it was sort of late in the day, so starting to be this like golden orange light, and the instructor was safely in the helicopter. Our whole group was back together, which I remember felt so good, because it had felt like, we loved each other. We wanted to be together, and this had like brought us even closer. So to have everyone back together. And I just remember standing there thinking like, God, I'm like really hungry. My feet are wet, like all the, discomforts, but I'm so happy and fulfilled. And this is what I want to do with my life. And I didn't really know exactly what I meant by this, but I did have some sense that it was loving that wild beauty, but also loving the experience that I'd had with that group, which I, now look back on and call leadership. But at the time I just, felt just this deep sense of connection. And that's what I was really loving. So that was NOLS number one for me.
I love that story so much. And I had, the details were different. It wasn't as dramatic, but I had, a very similar experience on mine, with a very similar experience of, even though I'm wet and I'm cold and not comfortable by regular standards, I love this. But then one question I have for you is, when I got home from NOLS, and then whenever I've gone on any kind of intense experience like mountain climbing or whatever, when I get home, I can have this problem readjusting, because in the mountains, everything, the consequences are usually high and usually immediate. You get instant feedback on your decisions, and everything seems important, especially in a situation like you had. So I'm curious, when you got home, I know you were going to be going to college, so there was a lot going on, but how was that adjustment going from these real visceral, important, in that case, life and death experiences, to back to normal life? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think for me, there was kind of like a slow burn of some of the readjustment challenges. I was an athlete, so I was like diving right into like high level sports. And so I think I felt like I initially played field hockey and lacrosse, and then narrowed down to just lacrosse, and then narrowed down to not doing any of that craziness anymore. But I played lacrosse through my junior year.
Oh, so, cool.
Yeah. And it was great. And it was great until I realized I wasn't having fun anymore. And actually that is part of the arc of NOLS for me, because once I sort of settled into college, I did find, and I look back and I see myself really trying to hold on to exactly what you're describing, that kind of realness and like consequential aspect of being in a wild place and reliant on yourself and your group. And I got pretty involved in the outdoor action program at my college, and actually chose after as I was working my way through my sophomore year, when I was starting to feel pretty like disenchanted with being a Division I athlete and all of what that entailed, and really wanted to be more connected to NOLS. So I applied for the instructor's course and realized I was kind of setting myself up for a conflict. I look back now and I can see that. And I think I kind of knew that at that time as well. And, I ended up getting accepted for it after. So I was set up to go out and do that in the summer between my sophomore and junior years, but I couldn't afford it. And so I had a kind of dilemma. And I remember a mentor said, well, you should ask, see if the school can pay for it. And so it ended up that the outdoor action program at our school paid for me to go, with an understanding that or gave me a scholarship. And I remember going in and being very anxious and having a conversation with the dean. And that was a great experience for me too, is realizing this is really important for me and I want to figure out how to make this happen. And so the agreement was that I would come back and kind of contribute more to the outdoor action program, which felt like win-win for me. That's no cost to spend more time, doing something that I love. So I did go and do the instructor's course. And I remember for that one having the anxiety of I don't know if I can do this. And I don't know if I want to be a NOLS instructor. But I remember my mom, I was having a conversation. I called her from the Denver airport on my way out there, in tears, secretly hoping she would just say, you don't have to do it. You can just come home, honey. But of course, because she's awesome, she just, it's you just get to go have this experience, and it will lead where it will lead, and it doesn't lock you into anything. And just, kind of one day at a time, and, just great advice, and absolutely no inch of saying you could just come home. That was not anything that was made possible, which was great. So I went out there and did it. And then it was another amazing experience, and came back. And that was when I kind of shifted to being more involved in the outdoor stuff than sports, and really kind of happy part of my college life. And really the friends that I'm still in touch with, I mostly made during that chapter of college.
I think it's really interesting and admirable, especially at age 19, 20, 21, to have the courage to step off of a very impressive path that seemed, by normal standards, being a D1 athlete, that's so many people just strive for that. And it's all they think about. And you were doing it, but you had enough kind of inner, you were able to reflect on it enough and think about it enough, and then step off and do something that you found more fulfilling. And then I also think about that with your career. I would imagine that there are tons of people who they want to go into management consulting or investment banking or go to law school and, all this kind of stuff. And your career has been more devoted to service and not just raking in as much money as possible. And at least, where I went to school, it was very standard procedure just to go into the type of work that leads to making the most money. And I tried that for a while, and it just was never a fit. So when you got out, when you graduated from college, where did you go from there? What was the plan?
For whatever reason, either naivete or obliviousness on my part, just awesome parenting. I will say
that's what I was thinking.
Were amazing I knew I had to pay my bills. It wasn't any, and as I said, I had to find a source of funding for the instructor's course, which wasn't all that expensive, but that was, it wasn't because I didn't have to think about money, but it was more, I think I just came from a family that was really meaning oriented. And my mom was an Episcopal priest, and my dad was a head of a school. And, they just really encouraged us to it wasn't a follow your bliss. It was more of a, you have to find meaning in what you do. And then you do that well to make your way. And I will say, in subsequent chapters of my life, it's I have felt like, would have been nice if I had like made a little more money. So I think and it's not something that people talk about a lot. Yeah. So I think my parents in kind of that context. And then also like I would, credit NOLS because it put structure around like what I could do. So when I did the instructor's course after my junior and senior years, I guess I worked at NOLS. Yeah, I did. So I did some couple summers there. And then I, launched into, I did an internship with a newspaper, High Country News. Which
I
awesome.
love High Country News.
Lived in Paonia, Colorado. It was amazing. And then I landed back home in the winter after I graduated and had what I refer to, and my kids know about this because I've shared this with them, my black abyss moment. I remember like sitting on my bed, I'd done this great internship and I was like, I'm just going to do this and then figure out what's next at that point. And I remember just sitting there and being like, oh my gosh, my future is a black abyss. And I said those words to my mom, like, what am I going to do? But then I decided kind of like things came together. I got curious about potentially, what are the different ways I could work in the environmental space, kind of like the mountaintop, this is what I want to do. I was like starting to parse that out. And so I looked at some nonprofit stuff. At that time for that winter, I did a part-time job at the Trust for Public Land, but then I ended up through a friend who had also done a NOLS course. I ended up getting a job at Albuquerque Academy in their experiential ed program, which is their outdoor program. And I was like over the moon because, it was stable. It was in one place. I could be out in the field a lot. So I could, be connecting people to that. And that was important because I had over those summers working for NOLS, I was like, I don't think I want to be a full-time instructor. My dad had some health issues. I feel like I think I need a little more of a like home base, but I really want to connect people to the outdoors and to the experience of that I had. And that was so profound for me. And so I ended up being at this school, Albuquerque Academy, for with a break for business school for basically 10 years.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which was great. And I shifted into the classroom towards the end just to test the waters on if that's what I wanted to do. But for 5 of those years, I was working in, and then I became department head of the experiential ed department. And that was a really great experience and kind of got me on the path of kind of starting to tease apart what it meant, what my mountaintop like this meant for me.
Mm-hmm. And so not just to go through every single step, but I'm very curious. I'm very, very curious about what led you to want to go to business school.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And honestly, when I was in business school, there are a couple times where I asked that question too, like, why did I think this is a good idea?
That was my same thing for me. I went, and it was during the financial crisis, and I'm watching everything and I'm like, how did I end up here?
Yeah. I now am like really glad that I went, but it took me the 2 years of business school and then a bunch of years afterwards to really get grounded in like, yes, that was the right move. But my intent was, while I was working in experiential ed, as I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm ready not to be out in the field quite as much, because I did that for 5 years and it was awesome. But I was like, just ready for a change. And I realized like what I was continuing to be most curious about was the leadership part of it. But I also, and I do look back and I'm like, I'm not sure how I kind of saw this, but I felt that like, I don't think people are going to, I know that it's been really consequential. Like basically in my 20s, I've been responsible for people's lives. So I feel like I've had this very real experience, but I think I'd had enough encounters where it's like, oh, nice. You're kind of like a camp counselor, kind of that. So I was like, all right, I actually want to be taken seriously. And so I really went to grad school and chose business school to pivot and create opportunity that I didn't think I would have. And I looked at more straight up like environmental science or environmental studies focus. But when it came down to it, I realized like, yeah, I'm sort of just most curious about, that other piece of my like mountaintop this moment, which was like getting a bunch of people to do this hard thing together. Like the nerdy side of me was like super curious about that and increasingly saw that in a way, maybe that is the work, is getting groups, not getting, but like being part of engaging groups of people to do hard things. Like, in a sense, what enterprise is not, at least in part, that. And I kind of started seeing that. And so business school was like, I want to understand what that could mean for me. I want to be taken seriously if I want to move in that direction. I want to open more opportunities. So I went to business school, and it was definitely challenging. Not so much I could handle the academics, but I think I found myself in an environment where, it was just really, really different thoughts on what it meant to like lead a productive and good life. And that was the best thing for me, even if in the moment I was like, where are my people? But I did end up finding a great little posse of friends, and I'm really grateful. I know now, in the same way that NOLS had like challenged me to step out of my comfort zone, I think I'm very glad that I, was in a place, as my dad said, it like sharpened my axe to go there, which I think he was very right.
I've found in my experiences where I get put in groups that may be a little bit outside of what I'm used to or what I feel comfortable around. I think I always say, like, worst case scenario, it bolsters the ideas that I already have, and it makes me feel stronger about the ideas that I already have. And best case, I changed my mind on some things and I learned some things. And I would imagine you probably had a little bit of both during that experience, because that is quite a different group of people than you'd been around, but invaluable, I'm sure. And so I'd love to hear more about this. This is skipping forward a little bit, but your work with the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, because that seems very interesting and seems like almost like a startup type mentality around a nonprofit, if my research is correct.
Yeah, very much so. And I think you're spot on. Yeah. So I live in this small town in Vermont and lived here at that time as well. And I had been working for the Trust for Public Land. And then after 9/11, I think we all sort of focused on the 08-09 economic recession, but there was like a dip and a lot of foundation challenges after 9/11. And the program that I was working on got cut. So I got laid off, which was not part of the plan at all. Like,
how many kids did you have kids at that point?
I had 2 kids. My son was 4 months old. I had just gone back. I had our health insurance. This was one of those moments where I was like, why did I think that like not just like finding a job with like that paid better would be a good call? But it was great. Like, as is often the case with like hard things, it was super clarifying. And I still don't totally know why this is one of the valuable takeaways that I got from that. But one of the takeaways I got was like, just get clear about what you want and ask for what you want. And I think maybe some of it was that in that job, which I really liked, it was an interesting program that I was working in, but I didn't have any sort of leadership authority. So when we got laid off, I felt like it happened to me and that there was nothing I could do about it. And I just really didn't like that feeling. So I was like, I think I want to be sure that I'm not in a position where other people can make such big decisions that affect my life and my whole family's life and potentially our ability to stay here. That just felt like there was a lot of power in the hands of someone else over my life. And I didn't like that. But there was also an element of like, maybe it was partly realizing like, okay, if I want to make sure I retain that power, I have to be clear about what I want. So somehow that was one of the things I worked through. And I ended up just taking some time with my son. And so my daughter was 3 and my son was 4 months old. So it was not a bad thing to find myself with a little more time, and just did a little consulting, and like we kind of made ends meet and made it work. And then I ended up being asked by a friend to talk with the founders of the Northern Forest Canoe Trail about the assistant director role. And I went in and talked with them, and like somehow my like ask for what you want new vibe came through, and I heard myself, and it really did feel like this. I heard myself saying like, this seems like a great position. This is not what I want to do. I would like to be the executive director. Like, let me know when that might happen, which is not like usually my MO. And I'm exaggerating only slightly how I said it, but I just felt really clear. Like, I don't really want to be the assistant director. And I was not an Office fan or watcher then. I don't think The Office was even out, but now I would have said like assistant to the director.
Yeah.
But that, so I said that, and I said, I really appreciate the chance to meet with you, and like, please let me know if something comes up. And this was in the fall. And in January, they reached back out to me and they said, hey, we just got a, federal grant, and we're now able to, like, that gives us a, really solid year or two of funding so that we can kind of build, and we'd like to hire you as the executive director. And, come talk to us, but we are going to not even open it up for other candidates.
Nice.
So it was great. So I said yes, and I negotiated. So I had like more flexibility with time, because again, I had realized, got young kids. And so then that was the start of 10 years. And you're absolutely right that it was very much a startup. And I, look back now, and I'm so grateful for that, because I do think having the opportunity to do the soup to nuts of an organization, even if it was hard at times, and even if it was not super well paid and like very scrappy, but I learned everything from, payroll and setting up our accounts in QuickBooks, and doing, the taxes, and getting like audited by the federal government for a grant we got, and like having to like learn all of that. But then also doing all the program work. And so it was such amazing leadership experience. And like at the time, I mostly was like, this is a great job that I can do where I am. And, so it was opportunistic in a lot of ways, but it turned out also to be incredible professionally, because it just gave me this chance to really learn so deeply and have, again, like I had said with NOLS, like just a ton of responsibility. Even though it was a small organization, we covered multiple states and, sort of had a big reach. And so I did, really gain a lot of experience in the 10 years I was there.
That just sounds so great. And I do think, particularly in the nonprofit world, there's something very valuable about being at a smaller, kind of scrappy organization where everybody has to do everything. I think it pulls people together as a team. So if my internet stalking is correct, you went over to 1% for the planet, but you went in at a director level. Not you did not go in directly as CEO. What was the mindset there? After you'd been in charge for 10 years, what kind of led you to 1% for a planet in a different type of role?
Yeah, when I had been at Northern Forest Canoe Trail for 10 years, I realized I was starting to have like an internal eye roll at some of the problems, which I actually should have been like excited to solve. So I was like, okay, I think I need to go. And I look back now, and I think I was probably just burnt out a little bit. I didn't know that terminology then. But so I think I had some kind of like existential is maybe too strong a word, but I was questioning like, so what's next? Do I want to go feel kind of stressed running another small regional nonprofit? Like, not really. Would it just be kind of moving the same things to a different desk? And our kids at that point were late elementary school, early middle school. And so it's like, yeah, this is not a great time to up and move. So it kind of narrowed the pond that I would be looking in. And, maybe this is a good time to shift away from running the show and just to be more of a like individual contributor. I just didn't know. And was definitely looking, to, being responsible for payroll for a small nonprofit for 10 years. And, I was just wanting to sort of put that burden down for a little while. So the 1% opportunity came up I basically did a 4-hour ridge run with the then CEO in the rain. And we had a great conversation about, what I was interested in and what he was thinking about. And so he developed this strategic partnerships role that I then stepped into. And it felt like kind of a lateral move. That was how I framed it in my head at the time. Like it was a bigger organization with bigger reach, but I wasn't running the whole show. I think for the first few months, I was so psyched and loved it. And then I realized like, oh, wait, what is that I'm feeling? And it was like a little like boredom, not because those roles aren't important. And I say that with like ton of respect for like, that could have been a great path, but it was such a important moment for me to realize I am just like wired to be curious about like, how does this all fit together? What are the strategic levers? How is the board fitting in? And I felt just kind of like my what was needed in the role I was in was not what I was most curious about. And so I wasn't going to be the best person in that role. And I was super interested in, and, also felt some frustration at not being able to sort of have my hands on those levers, not from a kind of power hungry way, but really I'm so glad I made that move, because it really helped me to see, oh yeah, like this is totally what I want to do. Meaning this being a leader is what I totally want to do. And so as it turned out, the then CEO announced that he was stepping down like a month after I started in my role. And so that began like a really interesting year, which ended up with me getting hired as CEO. So almost exactly a year after I started, I stepped into the CEO role, and it, definitely all sorts of fun challenges, but I really have never looked back in the sense of like, even when it's been hard, I've known like, this is the hard work that I want to do. Even, so I didn't have the feelings of like, am I in the right place, or have I chosen the right path? I've now been at 1% for 11 years, 10 as CEO. And I've, had many challenges along the way, but it has not been a challenge to feel clear that like, this is the work.
One follow-up question just on your mindset around that. I love reading history. I love reading biographies. And there's some term that I've come across a lot, and they describe certain people as being a quote, man of action, or we'll just say a person of action. And it seems like you're definitely a person of action. You're going, whether it was NOLS, whether it was sports, whether it's been your career, you seem to always be going forward. But a lot of time these people of action, one of the common themes is they're not at all self-reflective. They kind of just barge forward and don't really think about themselves or analyze themselves or even analyze what anybody else is thinking about them. They just kind of barrel through. But you seem to be one of these rare people that is a person of action, but you're also very self-reflective and paying attention to how you're feeling about things. How do you do that? Do you journal? Do you meditate? Is it just how you were born? It seems very different from a lot of people that have had similar career paths.
What I've realized is what excites me, and is I think how I'm most effective as a leader is in like integrating across the span of an organization to facilitate action, not just by me, but by all of us. And I think that's a different thing than me just like forging ahead and doing all the action. And so I think by being like a integrator and that's, to me, that's like how I see action. Cause I have, maybe this was kind of, this seed was planted in that NOLS experience, but I have this really clear sense, and I have all along, is like, I don't want to be the limiting factor. The best thing I can do is ensure that like I'm creating the conditions for everyone around me to be wildly successful. Like that's the language I use in the organization. You could also say just like be as, their most effective as who they are. And I have to be reflective to do that, because there can be moments where I have to like get my ego out of the way. Cause it's like, oh yeah, that person is better than you at this, Kate. And like early on, especially, I would have moments of like, wait, do they think I'm like, not as good a leader because I'm not doing that? Like I have had to be really reflective to, to embody and do the philosophy that I have had, but that I've had to get out of the way of. So I think that's how I would, answer it, is that yes, I am really action focused, but the particular way I'm action focused hinges on me being self-reflective.
Yeah. And just your lifelong and your family's lifelong focus on service. I think that seems to run through just your operating system is this generosity, I think you bring. For people, I would imagine, I'd be so surprised if anybody who listens to this podcast has not heard of 1% for the Planet or seen your logo with all these amazing companies. But for the like one or two people who don't know much about it, can you give an overview of the organization?
Yes. And it is really cool, because a lot of people have heard of it, but then it's really fun to describe how it actually works, because usually there's some ahas for even people who are familiar. So we are a global nonprofit, and the way we drive impact is we engage businesses to give 1% of their annual revenues to environmental partners, primarily nonprofits. And we facilitate that whole ecosystem. We do not act as a foundation, so we don't take in the money from the businesses and distribute it on their behalf or on our behalf. We advise the businesses, help them to figure out their giving strategies. We vet the nonprofits and ensure that any nonprofits in our network are, meet our eligibility criteria, are in good standing, can deliver. And then we facilitate connections, and then the businesses give directly, and then we certify the giving every year. So certification is a key part of what we offer. So what we end up with is this very credible model that we're able to track impact in the form of annual dollars allocated to impact. And it's highly credible because every business that's bearing that logo has been certified on an annual basis. They have done what they say they're doing. And in terms of just like the geography and scale of it, we have about 5,000 members. We're in about 100 countries, mostly US, Europe, UK, Australia is growing, Canada, and then, kind of scattering around other countries. And we love the members in whatever countries they land in. More than 50% of the network is outside of the US. So that like Europe, UK, et cetera, like that's the largest portion of the business. And then we have certified more than 800 million US dollars in our lifetime. We were founded in 2002. And we last year alone certified more than 100 million US dollars. And yeah, and we've seen a pretty significant acceleration in growth. So our big goal right now, which is very much like in sight and almost in hand, is to get to our first billion US dollars in giving. And then our next goal is to accelerate the rate at which we get to the next billion.
What do you attribute that acceleration over the last year or two? I mean, that's a big jump, 100 million.
Yeah. So the acceleration, like maybe the best way to describe it, my first year we certified, well, my first year in 2014, our lifetime giving at that point was about 100 million. And then we have in the last 10 years, that's now like our annual amount. So we've really the acceleration has been over that like 10-year period. It's hard. I think there are a lot of threads. I think, come like 2017, 18, 19, there was a growing thread of consumer interest in having their purchasing dollars go to products that represented solutions. So like, most people aren't big philanthropists or investors. They're buying groceries and food and what a great thing if those dollars can be allocated not only to get what you need, but also in the process to be contributing to a better planet and better future. And so there was a growing consumer interest in that. And then that led to, growing business awareness of the opportunity to attract consumers around that. And 1% for the planet had already been around for a long time at that point. And so we were able to bring a really credible opportunity to that because, not surprisingly, with, consumer interest and like business desire to capture that interest, there was some greenwashing going on of, businesses trying to position themselves without a whole lot of substance behind it. So 1% for the planet is kind of the opposite of greenwashing. And so we were really able to grow in that regard. And then interestingly, and not at all what we expected initially, we grew a lot during COVID. And I think that there was a combination of like, in some businesses, they're like, we've always wanted to do this and now we just have the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of a funny, unexpected thing. And then I think there was also an element of how, even though COVID was more a health crisis, it was a global crisis at scale that happened really fast. And so I think it made climate change and some of the big issues that could seem kind of a little bit removed, just be like, oh, whoa, like big, scary change can happen fast. So I think it just like brought some things home. And so there was action on that. Right now, the current climate has been a slower growth climate just because there's so much uncertainty. And, but 1% continues to represent this like path forward. So that's one of the powerful things about our model is we were kind of built for action in dynamic environments, whatever the particular dynamics may be.
It's one of the things that seems, I don't know if it was part of the plan or if it's become part of the plan, was obviously the impact is very, very, very important, and you can measure it. But then it seems like it's a win-win. One of the ways it's a win-win is that the businesses that sign up, it's almost like a marketing or like a certification, that when you see a company that is associated with 1% for the planet, I think there are a lot of people that are more likely to buy from that company because they have that, for lack of a better word, certification. And is that something that you think about, how businesses can use that 1% logo for marketing them, or kind of showing the type of company they are?
Absolutely. And it's a really interesting topic, because we are very comfortable with the business case for 1% for the planet. Like, we actually think it's the best thing if a business is not only giving their 1%, which every single 1% for the planet is doing every single year. If they can do that and it can be a lift to their overall business at the same time, like, what is wrong with that? There is nothing wrong with that. That is only good. And it's interesting though, because, for some people it takes a little while, or they may never really get comfortable with that, because there's some sense of like impact is sullied if it also has commercial value. And that is something we really try to like make clear. And it's been a strong connection for us with our businesses, is really, really making that strong case for like, leverage this, like talk about it. It's valuable to customers, and you're never there's no way you're going to be in our network if you're not doing what you say you're doing. So we're your accountability partner. We're making sure that you're credible, and that, woe be unto the person who meets our certification team and hasn't done what they said they're doing. Like, they're not going to make it through. So we know that credibility is there.
One question kind of about the nonprofit business in general, you mentioned that sometimes people can kind of shy away when there starts being talk of commercial success. And, and I feel like in the nonprofit world, because I used to work in the nonprofit world, there are a lot of these kind of status quo ideas that when you really zoom out, they don't make much sense. It just seems like they've been there for a while. And that's one. And then, this idea that you need to take a huge pay cut to work at a nonprofit. But it seems like some of that stuff is changing. And it seems like, at least with forward thinking, innovative nonprofits, they understand the value of partnering with business. And I think about Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard, who was one of the founders of 1%. There was a point where he was going to Walmart to help them figure out how to be more sustainable. And I saw interviews with him. He's like, I never would have thought I'd ever be in here at Walmart, but here I am. Can you talk more about just your personal or 1%'s thoughts on the need to really embrace business going forward and not just have it be nonprofits and business as two separate things?
Yeah. I mean, and that is like absolutely the space we live and breathe in. So yes, I absolutely can speak to that. And I would say where I come out and where we come out on this is seeing that there's a huge gap in funding for environmental solutions. And the problem isn't so much that we don't know what solutions there are. There's like a lot of good data and knowledge on the things we need to do. There's just a huge funding gap, in the trillions of dollars. And so, our thinking is, in the genesis of 1% for the planet, was that businesses operate in the marketplace and they generate resources through their market activities. And to the extent that businesses can see the way in which a healthy planet and a healthy future are assets that they need to invest in, let's take some of those resources in a structured way that you can plan around from that marketplace and allocate them to impact solutions. The need is known, the funding is there, and the gap is known, and the win-win, if you think long-term, is very clear. And so, really leaning into that understanding of and practice of kind of cross-sector exchange of dollars for impact, as it were, is to us like just such a huge and important opportunity, and something that we see our members, especially those members who have been with us for a long time, just like really leaning into. It's like they wouldn't think of not paying their staff. They wouldn't think of like not paying the rent or lease for their factory. And so they increasingly are like, yeah, and we're going to pay for this like core underlying asset, which is the earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. I feel like I'm not deeply involved, but I feel like that idea of working, kind of merging business and nonprofit, I feel like it's becoming more and more kind of or more and more normalized across but we'll see. So you and I are recording this today, and then next week I'm recording an episode with Paul Hendricks, who is the somewhat new head of the Conservation Alliance. And we're going to put these episodes out kind of back to back or one week after the other. And I know that you and Paul and 1% and the Conservation Alliance have teamed up on a few things. Can you talk a bit about that? And then people who are listening, listen next week and you'll hear more from Paul.
Yeah, I love that. So Paul is great.
I love him.
Alliance is so fortunate to have him. And one of our former staff members, Carla Fox, is also working at Conservation Alliance. So there's like this beautiful connection between us. So just want to celebrate that. And additionally, there's a structural connection, which is that the Conservation Alliance is an approved environmental partner in our network. So members, companies that are members of Conservation Alliance, through their model, the dollars that they're allocating to Conservation Alliance count towards their 1% certification. So all sorts of really cool connections. And then, more specifically this year, one of the things that we've been working on together and that the Conservation Alliance is leading, and we have joined with them. So thanks to Paul and his team for their leadership on this, is an effort called Brands for Public Lands. And that is getting to the last question that you asked, like this is bringing brands together, businesses together to, join voices and join forces to say public lands are valuable to, for the many reasons of, natural beauty, habitat, recreation, and the economy. Like these brands can like make a really clear case for how public lands are a business driver. And there's some like good numbers on the recreation economy and the value of that. And a lot of that takes place on public land. So it's been really great to, again, with really outstanding leadership from Paul and his team, to join that and to invite our membership. And it's an opt-in. So like it's not like our whole membership is participating, but like it's an option that we can now make available to our members to join forces and just add voices to this effort.
Yeah, that just seems like such a perfect pairing. And when you go back in time and see how each organization was started, it makes perfect sense because so many of the same minds were behind both organizations. So I'll be excited to watch all that as it continues to develop. And Paul's one of only 3 people that in my whole life that I would consider a running partner, because I like to be alone when I run. But Paul is such a good dude. He was my running partner for like 5 years when we both lived in Boulder. So he and my wife used to work together. So
okay, that's good to know, because I am the same way. I have like a few people that I like to run with, but mostly it is more of a solitary exercise.
Yeah, let my brain go crazy for a little while. One more question about leadership, if you don't mind. I'm curious who you admire as leaders, because you work closely and face to face with so many amazing people, and your paths has crossed with so many amazing people. But then it could be people that you've never met, that you've read about, historical figures. Who, when you think about your heroes' leadership or just heroes in general, who comes to mind?
I know, it's such a good question. And like, you would think at this stage in my career that I would be able to just be like, oh yeah, it's this person. But I always am like, who am I going to say? But I will give a nod to NOLS because, in part because of this conversation, but I really do. I want to say my course leader on my student course was someone who, for the first time, I saw this blend of like deep competence and like enormous emotional intelligence. I didn't really have either of those words at the time, but I do like that has always stayed with me because I've all, those two qualities are what I just like admire so greatly. So I will say, that, and, that's not like big name, writing books and all that, but just like a true embodiment of what I think are really just key qualities. And also like, giving opportunity to others, seeing in me the opportunity to lead. So like, I do think that's such an important quality. And then, I read a lot of books, some about leadership, some just about like people. And, I think in general, my curiosity is piqued by leaders who are not flashy, but are very like grounded in what their sort of particular like special sauce is. So I would say another, leader who has really influenced how I show up, whether I'm like public speaking or just like thinking how I'm interacting with people, is my mom. She is no longer with us, but she just had this like intense courage about how she kind of built her life, but also this, as when we were kids, annoying level of desire to interact with people and really get to know them, because she would just like keep talking and we'd always be like, we're ready to go home or we're ready to stop. But I now know that I can like look back as not a kid who was being inconvenienced by her, but as like, she just like was forming these deep connections with people because she genuinely liked that and believed in that. But it also was like, she then had those relationships and that created this like really strong web around her. So she was able to like do so much through that. And not that she had built it for the, utilitarian purpose of getting stuff done. She genuinely liked all those people, but she built that network. So, those are kind of quiet answers, but that's where I'm going to stand today.
I love that. And it fits in perfectly with this quote that I have that I found somewhere on the internet that apparently you said, you can tell me if it's internet crazy, but you say, leadership isn't made in the spotlight. It's forged in small, consistent, humble moments. Those moments stacked up over time are what have shaped my career most and have led to the most powerful outcomes. And I think both of those examples are perfectly in line with that quote. I love that.
Yeah, definitely. That is, thank you for quoting that back. Because I do always struggle with that question, because I think I'm actually not just hard put to sort of think of who is the person that embodies that, but I'm wary of like the guru or the really flashy person, just because I've seen the ways in which, well, just for me, that's not what that doesn't like resonate as much. And so I suspect that the leaders that would most inspire me, I probably just haven't met them yet because they're doing their work. And I love that.
Yeah. I think I love that answer. When we talked on the phone a few weeks ago, you and I are going to be doing a panel at the NOLS 60th reunion, which I'm very excited about to get to hang out in person. But we were talking about all that stuff, and then the conversation inevitably just kind of drifted into books. And I think we're both big readers. Any books that you would recommend? They don't have to necessarily be about leadership or any particular topic, but do any books come to mind that have been super important for you as a person and professional?
Yeah, there's a couple. And they're more kind of like adjacent to leadership. I mean, I definitely have like, Good to Great and Scaling Up have been, are like Post-it noted and marked, and like my team uses them. So those are very like practical books. But in terms of just like shaping like how I think about things, kind of current books that have been on my mind. One is Bird by Bird by Annie Lamott. I feel like managing overwhelm is a big part of being a leader. And it's also a big part of like leading the piece of leadership that is specifically leading other people. Cause I think as people are growing and developing in their careers, they invariably end up taking on more complexity. And I haven't yet met a person who doesn't like experience some overwhelm as they step into that. And the concept of Bird by Bird just seems to land really well. And this is a book by Annie Lamott, actually about writing, which I think is also kind of appropriate because writing is leadership and writing are kind of degrees of separation removed. They're not necessarily entirely different, I don't think. But it's like breaking down the book report about birds into bird by bird. And so I do use that a lot in my own life, but also as just like how I help invite people into like, parsing their way through complexity. I also read a book recently, which I don't know how much it directly ties to leadership, but it just like totally sparked my curiosity and I just loved it. It's called The Light Eaters, Light, Light Eaters. And it's about plant intelligence. And, it just is so fascinating. And I think what really just I found fascinating about it is it just, for me, opened up a understanding of how much is going on that we don't see or that certainly I did not know about. And I think there's so many unanswered questions. So I think that we all don't know about. And, to the extent that I tie that to leadership, I do think there is such an important element of like continuing to be a learner and continuing to, know that you don't know what you don't know and to stay open to that. So I read that book with fascination, just like purely because it was so interesting and mind boggling. And I can make that connection legitimately to how I think about leadership is just the deep importance of like staying curious, of continuing to learn and of being like really open about like anytime you're learning stuff, you're going to not get stuff right. And so then being able to, stay in the leadership stance while being like, oh yeah, I messed that up or I got that wrong. And that's been a really important piece of growth for me to just like lean into that. And it's, I've had some pretty big moments of that and have loved the fact that my team has, embraced and learned from and like, probably felt the frustrations, but we've also, the act of then saying like, I own this and like, what else do I need to learn that I'm not seeing has just created this like openness and power that we share together, which I'm really grateful for.
I really just love your whole approach to leadership. I think it's humble and generous, service oriented, and at the end of the day, very, very, very effective on top of all that. And I feel like sometimes, particularly as the internet tries to dumb things down or simplify things, there's this idea of what, that a leader needs to be loud and pushing forward and telling people what to do. And I just feel like your career is the exact opposite of that, with even better results than most people experience as a leader. So thank you for being so open and sharing all that. Any final words, any way you'd like to wrap this up? I mean, we will continue talking in a few weeks in Wyoming, but for the people listening to this, any parting words?
Maybe, thank you so much for all of that. And maybe I would just say, I spoke about my mom some, but one of the things that my dad said to me at one point when he was like 85, and he has passed away as well. But it's really stayed with me because he was 85 using a walker. My younger self, was seeing like limitations in his life experience, but his message to me, which he shared, like I was giving a high school graduation speech. So I had reached out to ask him like what's a good approach to this? And, he gave me some guidance, blah, blah, blah. And then we got off the phone. And then the next morning he called me back and he's like, you know what I think the most important message to share is that the journey continues. And again, this is a guy whose, life was, as I saw, had become pretty small and pretty limited at that point, but he did not see it that way. He was continuing to learn. And to me, that's just like such a powerful message, is that like wherever we are as a leader, whatever we're doing, the journey continues. And I think to the extent that I embrace that, I always am, having better experiences. And I hope being a better person in my interactions with others.
I love that. And that's a perfect note to end on. And I just really, really, really appreciate you taking the time. And like I said, I can't wait to meet you in person up in Wyoming. That's going to be an amazing weekend. And just thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for talking to me, and keep up all the great work.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation too.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.